Loyalty is the most misunderstood word in the history of the Imperium. It has been repeated so often that it has lost its shape, flattened into a moral badge rather than a function. In the age of the Great Crusade, loyalty did not mean faith, obedience, or even love. Loyalty meant alignment with an end state. And this is where the tragedy begins. Because every legion that remained loyal to the Emperor misunderstood what that end state actually was. Not one of them rebelled against him. Not one of them raised a blade in open treachery. And yet, every single Loyalist Legion betrayed him all the same. Not by disobedience, but by preservation. Not by defiance, but by continuation. The Emperor did not need eternal soldiers. He needed an ending. What his sons gave him was permanence. The Great Crusade was never meant to last. This is not metaphor. It is not implication. It is design. The Thunder Warriors were not a mistake. They were a prototype. They were proof that the Emperor understood the concept of disposability long before the Astartes ever walked the stars. The Emperor did not create warriors to rule humanity forever. He created warriors to make themselves obsolete. This is the core truth the Loyalist Legions failed to grasp. The Imperium was a bridge, not a destination, and every legion that fought to preserve it, rather than dismantle it, committed the same quiet betrayal. The Emperor's true project was not conquest. It was transition, a psychic humanity stabilized within the webway, shielded from the warp, no longer dependent on gene-forged demigods or god-kings. The Astartes were not heirs. They were scaffolding, temporary, brutal, effective, and doomed. The Loyalists never accepted this. They loved the war too much. They defined themselves by it, and in doing so, they ensured it would never end. The Dark Angels were the first to fail, because they understood too much and trusted too little. They were not loyal to the Emperor as a man, or even as an idea. They were loyal to method, to control, to secrecy as a virtue. The First Legion was built to eliminate threats before they became visible, to erase knowledge before it spread, to decide internally what could be allowed to exist. This made them effective. It also made them dangerous. The Emperor needed unity at the end of the Crusade, not hidden blades and compartmentalized truths. The Dark Angels preserved their internal authority, rather than dissolving it into a post-Crusade humanity. They chose to remain watchers when they should have become builders. Their betrayal was subtle. They kept the Emperor's tools sharp long after the hand that wielded them no longer needed to exist. The Imperial fists failed by believing that obedience was sufficient. They are often remembered as the purest loyalists, and in a narrow sense they were. But loyalty without interpretation is not loyalty. It is automation. Dawn built walls because walls made sense to him. He fortified the Imperium as if it were a city under permanent siege, never questioning whether the siege itself was the problem. The Emperor did not need an eternal fortress. He needed the courage to tear one down once it had served its purpose. The Imperial fists froze the Imperium in a defensive posture, mistaking survival for success. Their betrayal was structural. They ensured that humanity would always brace for an enemy, instead of preparing for transcendence. The Blood Angels failed, because they refused to confront their own impermanence. They knew they were flawed. They knew the Red Thirst was not a battle condition, but a terminal flaw. And yet they chose beauty over honesty. Sanguinius became a symbol too perfect to contradict. His legion wrapped their genetic catastrophe in myth and sacrifice, presenting themselves as noble martyrs rather than unstable weapons. The Emperor did not need symbols. He needed solutions. The Blood Angels chose to die beautifully instead of living truthfully. Their betrayal was emotional. They turned suffering into identity and identity into legacy, ensuring the flaw would endure long after the Crusade should have ended. The Iron Hands failed by rejecting the very thing the Emperor was trying to preserve. Humanity was not an inefficiency to be optimized away. It was the point. Ferrus Manus understood strength, but he never understood purpose. After his death, his legion did not grieve. They recalibrated. They removed weakness by amputating meaning. Flesh became failure. Emotion became error. The Iron Hands did not betray the Emperor by embracing machines. They betrayed him by forgetting why humanity needed saving in the first place. A future ruled by logic without empathy is not ascension. It is extinction with better tools. The Ultramarines failed by succeeding too well. Guilliman did what no other Primarch managed. He made the Imperium work, administratively, logistically, politically, and in doing so he locked it into a form that could no longer evolve. Ultramar was not a stepping stone. It became a template. The Emperor's vision required instability, a breaking point, a moment where the scaffolding could be removed. Guilliman stabilized the structure before that moment arrived. The Ultramarines did not betray the Emperor through arrogance or ambition. They betrayed him by mistaking governance for destiny. They created a system that could survive indefinitely, ensuring it would never become something better. The White Scars failed because they understood the trap and chose distance over responsibility. Jagatai Khan saw the Imperium for what it was, a necessary brutality masquerading as enlightenment. He sensed the lie at its core. But rather than confront it, rather than force the question of what came next, he rode away from it. Freedom became an excuse for disengagement. The White Scars preserved their autonomy at the cost of influence. They chose motion over transformation. Their betrayal was passive. They let the Imperium harden while they remained unbound, mistaking personal liberty for philosophical resistance. The Raven Guard failed because Corax could not reconcile victory with corruption. He saw what the Crusade demanded and recoiled from it too late. His legion mastered shadow, precision, asymmetry, but these were tactics, not answers. When the genetic experiments failed and the dream of controlled perfection collapsed, Corax withdrew. He chose absence over adaptation. The Emperor did not need purity. He needed the will to make terrible choices and then dismantle the system that required them. The Raven Guard abandoned the future rather than shape it with compromised hands. Their betrayal was quiet. They left the Imperium to rot rather than accept responsibility for its survival. The Salamanders failed in the most humane way possible, which is why it is the most tragic. Vulcan believed, genuinely, that the purpose of the Crusade was to protect humanity, not prepare it, not change it, preserve it. But preservation was never the goal. Humanity, as it existed, could not survive what it was becoming. The Emperor needed transformation, not guardianship. The Salamanders slowed the machine, shielded the innocent, held the line against cruelty, and in doing so reinforced the illusion that the Imperium could be moral without ending the war that defined it. Their betrayal was compassionate. They chose to save lives in the present at the cost of condemning the species to endless suffering. The Space Wolves failed because they were never meant to think. They were meant to act, and they embraced that role too completely. Russ was loyal, but his loyalty was instrumental. He was the Emperor's sanction, not his successor. When Prospero burned, it was not because the Space Wolves misunderstood their orders. It was because they did not question why those orders existed in the first place. They enforced unity through annihilation. They destroyed a future to preserve authority. The Emperor needed fewer executioners and more architects. The Space Wolves ensured that fear would outlive reason. Their betrayal was obedient, and that made it irreversible. This is the point where most viewers will have already chosen a side. Some of these failures will feel justified. Some will feel necessary. Some will feel unforgivable. That division matters, because the Imperium was built by people who never agreed on where necessity ended and betrayal began. If you had to draw that line, if you had to name the moment loyalty became failure, put it in the comments. Not because there is a correct answer, but because the Imperium has been tearing itself apart over that question for 10,000 years. And now we reach the truth that binds them all together. None of the Loyalist Legions prepared humanity for a world without them. None of them dismantled the war economy. None of them questioned whether the Imperium should be allowed to survive indefinitely. They fought to win a war that was never meant to be permanent. They preserved institutions that were supposed to collapse. They mistook survival for success, continuity for victory. The Emperor did not want an eternal empire. He wanted a final one, a structure strong enough to end itself once its purpose was fulfilled. Instead, his loyalists turned it into a mausoleum, a civilization optimized for war, worshipping a god who never wanted believers, ruled by angels who were never meant to reign. The Emperor sits on the golden throne not because his enemies defeated him, but because his sons ensured that his dream could never conclude. That is the real betrayal, not treason, not heresy, but the refusal to let an ending exist. The Loyalist Legions did not betray the Emperor by turning against him. They betrayed him by ensuring his nightmare would last forever. The Emperor wanted an ending. His sons gave him eternity.